Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. And I am here now with Erica. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be with you.
Yes, I think this is your first time on my podcast. I've been on yours, and we need to have this conversation. We chatted a long time ago on Instagram, and I've been following your journey, and it's very clear from the start, it's been very clear how passionate you are about helping moms. And
Hmm.
it's been truly wonderful to see you and Momwell grow, and now your book out being, coming out. I'm just so excited for you. So first, congratulations on the work that you do.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, I never went to school to license as a therapist to think I'd end up here. The journey has been
Mm.
so interesting. But thank you. It's so exciting to finally have the book out in the world. Such a project in the background, like 2.5 years. So
Oh my
finally get to
gosh.
celebrate it. Yeah.
But I got the same feeling from everything that you put out there, which was the feeling of being seen as a mom and finally feeling validated. So has that been part of the why behind everything that you do with Momwell?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I went through my own postpartum depression and anxiety.
Mm.
I had been a therapist working with children's and families for, I don't know, nearly 10 years. I had 7 years of education. I hadn't even heard of maternal mental health as a specialty, like, did not come up in
Wow.
all of that time.
Oh my gosh.
And so I didn't know to be on the lookout that it was a high risk time that I might struggle. And so, as a clinician who does this for a living, going
Mm.
through postpartum depression and anxiety really threw me off, like in a number of ways.
Mm.
And it wasn't until I dug in to understand and to specialize in maternal mental health that I began to realize that this is a vast problem for people. And not only is it a vast problem, but when they feel that way, they feel isolated in it. They feel like they are the only one. So we don't necessarily turn to each other.
Mm.
And then we might go to our general provider or to a general therapist, even who doesn't have any training, and then be told like, oh, this is what motherhood is, or oh, you're just adjusting, you're just sleep deprived, you just need some rest.
Right.
And women were being dismissed and
Mm.
gaslit kind of left, right, and center. So what I
Mm.
do commonly here is what you've just said, where I felt so seen and acknowledged for the
Mm.
first time, putting my thoughts or experiences into words. And I feel like I'm kind of a translator of sorts. Like, I do just kind of put that language to that experience, which can feel so validating just to be seen in that way.
Just the post I remember a while ago you had posted, and you still do post about rage. And
Yeah.
I think for me, even reading the comments, it felt like people were wondering, like, is everything okay with me? Am I normal? Is this common? And like you just said, realizing that we're not the only ones already, just in that feels good. And you're like, oh, okay, she has it too. Or, just getting to know yourself as well. So I'm assuming, that you've heard a lot of this from your community in terms of, I only through your post or through the work that you do realize that I'm not the only one.
Hmm. And it comes up in a couple of areas. One major one is the invisible load posts. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where the whole releasing the Motherload book came from, because
Right.
invisible labor or mental labor is invisible. And that's why it's so pervasive. Like, we can't quite put our finger on it. I equate it to an invisible backpack that we're handed when our kids are
Mm.
born, that we feel the weight of it. We know it's there, we feel it,
Right. Mm.
but I can't describe to you, because it's no one singular little task. It's not just the one doctor's appointment I have to book. It's not just the one little, like the lunch I have to pack today. It's all the other things that go into that that really feel heavy to carry, especially when we feel like we're doing it alone. So
Mm.
that is a big one, putting that into words, and it's invisible. And then the other one is anger and mom rage, because it's invisible in the sense that we don't see others talking about it, and
Right.
everybody looks very matching outfits, curated, beautiful highlight moments, and we don't know that they might be losing their cool at bedtime too. And so we go
Mm.
underground in shame with those feelings, and they're not openly talked about a lot. So
Right.
we bring that piece into it too, and people often feel validated having that conversation.
Right. And, the invisible load, and not just the invisible load, but the load of motherhood. I love how you kind of broke that down into your book. And the way I saw it is like the different hats that we wear, that, like you said, we don't like consciously just stop and think about it all. And when you break it down the way that you did, I think it really helps us. And, uh, you know, I think back to the way that I am, and kind of realizing as I was going along that I was putting a lot of
Yeah.
that in the end, certain things didn't really matter, but I needed the house to be perfect just in case, I needed the meals to be perfect because I put this pressure on myself. Do you think that part of this load are pressures that we place on ourselves?
It's such an interesting question. I get when I was shopping the book around, the concept of the book, I'm talking to mom and I'm talking about our beliefs and why we carry this load and how we carry this load.
Mm,
And I got a lot of, why is this book being written for mothers and not for partners? Like partners need to be the
sure,
ones
I get
to
that.
contribute
Yeah.
and chip in. 100% that is
Mm,
true. And also,
mm,
we have grown up with images and ideals of motherhood everywhere from the
mm-hmm,
time that we were born through till we become mothers ourselves. And in the book, I equate it to this drawer labeled like motherhood or mom. And everything that we ingest and take in throughout the years gets shoved into this drawer.
mm,
And it's contradicting, it's maybe idealistic, it's all kinds of things. And then we step into motherhood and like that's all we have to go off of was all of this junk we kind of like gathered and shoved in there and we haven't really like intentionally sorted through any of it.
mm,
And much of what is put in there is expectations of others, value systems of others, social expectations and norms from others,
mm-hmm,
and so little of it is intentionally ours. So it is so easy when we walk into motherhood or we enter into motherhood to feel pressure in every single direction because we don't have any clear guiding force. We feel the need to go everywhere, right? Like we
mm-hmm,
feel the need to be perfect in every aspect of everything. And it is so common. It's such a common experience, especially I feel like the first transition into motherhood, like that first time mom, because you start to find your identity and your groove a little bit more as you go. But it all kind of comes to a head and we're forced to let some things go, find our identity and figure out what works for us.
mm. I think back to my question originally, and I think you're right. I was thinking about I guess, the expectations or the pressures we put on ourselves, but that pressure of having that clean home in case somebody comes, or, if somebody sees it or whatever it is because of others, not ourselves. So it really
It's
does come down to,
internalized.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
That's so good. So let's say somebody is listening to this and they're like, yeah, I identify with all this. This is me. How do they begin some of this work? I guess putting into thought or putting into context also the different hats that you talk about, right? Like, how do we begin this work to kind of lessen this pressure that we have on ourselves?
Yeah. Well, I will say the book is a guide to do that. It's the very intention of why it is written to walk you through so you don't have to do that mental trying to navigate your way through. But one really tactical, like in the moment strategy is stopping when you feel that pressure and just asking, where does this expectation or should come from right
Mm,
now? An example that I have of this is I remember we were hosting, I don't know, family holiday, Christmas, something. And I found myself scrubbing the baseboards in my bathroom, like my powder room on my main floor, scrubbing the baseboards. I'm like, what the frick am I doing? I do not care about these baseboards being clean, like low on the priority list, you
right.
know?
Yeah.
And when I paused and just questioned what it was like this automatic reflex that just kicked in, I realized I felt a strong my mom was very particular about how the house
Mm,
was kept. And so,
mm,
my way to show her that I'm being a good mom is by keeping house, let's say.
yeah.
And
Mm,
so, that knee jerk reaction was just because of something that I had observed. But do I really care about the baseboards being squeaky clean? I really don't. There are a million other things I care about before the baseboards.
right.
And so just catching yourself in that
Mm,
moment where you go into this automatic behavior or reaction, but and it feels a pressure like there's eyeballs on you almost,
mm,
and
mm,
questioning like what is guiding this for me right now?
mm. I'm thinking of that scenario, and I know it's a very common one. I think common is like the keeping your house clean for the mother or the mother-in-law, but also how you're parenting your child. There might be people judging you, and you, especially what I hear a lot from parents or moms is, when the child has big emotions or tantrums, that's really
Mm,
hard because, like you said, like the eyeballs are on you. But what if, this not cleaning those baseboards leads to comments from your family? How can a mom sort of learn how to cope? Do you cope with it, or do you set a boundary? Do you let it
yeah.
go? How do you cope with that?
Yeah, there is no shortage of people who want to hand us their priorities and their value system. Like it's everywhere we turn. It's on Instagram, it's in
Right.
our interactions with our mother-in-laws and
Mm-hmm.
our other family members. And in the book, one of the foundational chapters at the beginning is taking you through understanding your own value system as a person and also as a mother. Because when you understand what you value and what your family values and what is important to you, when somebody comes along and says something like, "Why aren't you signed up for activities after school?" You're like, because right now, like, it doesn't align with what's important to us or like, you can see and recognize that they carry around their bag of values with them that they're trying to distribute to you for you to
Right.
adopt and pick up, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when there's like clarity there, you can see that this actually isn't about me and my behavior. It isn't about the fact that I'm failing my child because they're not in after school activities. It's just about the fact that we have difference in values and approach, and that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. I don't have to adopt that model, nor do you have to adopt mine.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just not used to living in that space. We have very pigeonholed thoughts and ideals for how things should go. And boundary setting, once you do know those values, is definitely one of those pieces. Like, I appreciate that works well for you and your family, but that's just not our thing. Yeah.
That after school activity example and the values is such an important one because I do know lots of people in my own surroundings that feel the pressure to put their kids in so much. And
Yeah.
I was having breakfast with a friend of mine and she was explaining what her weeknights look like and what her weekends look like. And my response to that was, when do you guys sit down at home and chill and just relax? And she was like, Cindy, like Friday nights, if there's no party, at somebody's house. And that she seemed to have this sort of pressure of, well, I have to put them in this, I need to put them in that. And I think it's a really important conversation to have and to go back to our values because that creates a huge load on us, like especially coming back from work and having to rush to do all these things. So I think it really is important. You mentioned
Hmm.
values, and I do think that it's something I talk a lot about because I think that sometimes we forget about them and we need to come back to them. Do you have any advice for
Hmm.
somebody who has forgotten this and needs to kind of reassess like what their values are? Is there like one or two questions that they can ask themselves?
Yeah. There's a couple of exercises even that are really tangible. I have a free download on my website, ericadjossa.com, DJOSSA, and I can
Mhm.
send that to you to distribute
I'll
to your
add it.
community.
Hmm.
And it's a value sort where you like cut out the cards, you put them out in front of you, and it's kind of think it through, maybe talk it through with your partner, process of elimination to find your way to your values. But I think one of the bigger issues is that when we enter motherhood, we're in a little bit of a transformation time, right? Like we're in
Hmm.
matrescence where our values are getting a really big overhaul and reorganization. And we're also reevaluating the shoulds that we have been put on us. Like there's
Mm.
just a lot of like existential identity things happening during this time,
Right.
right? And one of the sneaky things about these shoulds and these ideal and these internalized pressures that we were talking about is they can kind of feel like they're what we value. Like when something is internalized and we haven't unlearned it or thought it through,
Hmm.
it might feel like the knee-jerk reaction is because like, well, I care about this. Like, why do I care about this? Do I care about this because I'm trying to protect myself from judgment?
Hmm.
Because I'm trying to keep up with the parents around me, because I'm trying to prove that I'm a good mom to my mother or mother in law?
Mm.
Or is this something that I truly love and want to do and is important to me and my family? So, parsing out those knee jerk reactions and just being conscious about it
Mm.
goes such a long way. And having the time, it's like if you are sleep deprived and postpartum, like you don't need to carve out your values right now. You just need to
Right.
sleep. But then
Yes.
when you do have the space
Yeah.
to just begin to unpack it a little bit, and a really tangible activity like the values sort or the list in the book can
I
be a
love
really
that.
great place to start, because sometimes we don't even have the language. Yeah.
It's true. It's not just about sitting down and saying, okay, what are my values? You really have to give it some thought and like compare certain things. And like you said, I think there are some that are ingrained in us and we don't realize that this might have been a value that I was raised, with, but now it might have changed for me now as a
Mm-hmm.
mom. So I absolutely love that. We will share that link and I hope everybody will get the book so they can see it as well. I'm thinking about work life balance. I don't personally like that term,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know if that exists. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that for parents or for moms who feel like it's a never ending battle to balance both. And that really adds to that invisible load that we have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was doing a talk on burnout at one of the
Mm,
big banks here in Toronto with their women's group.
mm,
And digging into the stats, 50 years ago, 50 or 75 years ago, okay, don't quote me 100% here. I'm pretty sure it's 50 years ago. Only 25% of women mothers worked outside of the home. And
wow.
now it's nearly 80% in
Wow.
only 50 years. We had one role and job, literally, which was
Mm,
to keep house,
hmm.
childcare. All of that was our role at the time. Now, in a mere like 50, 60 years, 80% of us are working full time and trying to do this full time role,
Mm,
because society hasn't adjusted to free us up from this previous role that we're just expected to carry still, right?
yeah.
So like
Hmm.
we still have 100% of this work, which was a full-time job, by the way, and
Hmm.
now actually work outside of the home or from home or whatever,
Right.
part-time, full-time as well.
Mm,
Is it any wonder we feel like we are fraying and coming apart at the seams? Like it is entirely unrealistic. So the
mm,
concept that we can keep all these balls in the air and juggle them, frankly, enrages me, because it's so unrealistic to even expect that of somebody, right? Like it's just
it's
like
true.
mind-boggling when you lay
Hmm.
it out on paper. But there's there's also this interesting trend that's happening in motherhood right now, though, and it's called intensive mothering, or the perfect mother myth, where
Mm,
we're seeing this, and research is seeing, and sociologists are seeing this push towards all involved, all consuming, all self martyring motherhood
mm,
that requires every piece of you, or you're doing it incorrectly. So you have to give all your time, all your resources, all your energy, all your attention to your child in order to be a good mom and to be
yeah.
doing your job right. And so, of course, when we work or have a project or miss a field trip that I'm going to miss next week because I have a work trip I have to do, or I'm going away for 6 days and the
Mm,
kids cried and had a meltdown, and it's like, sorry, I
mm,
understand that's difficult, but mommy has a work trip. Anytime we start to put anything before motherhood, we are shamed back into our place
right.
very quickly.
Mm,
So it's this, we're meant to still carry the housework and all the care work, and to open a smile and dare not be angry, anything but patient and kind and loving, and be satisfied with that role. But also, a lot of women want things outside of that role,
mm,
and it feels scary to talk about wanting that, or just frankly economically need to go to work and do things outside of that
right.
role,
True. Mm,
right?
mm,
So it is a cluster F of a situation, honestly. It's a really unfair, sort of stacked against us
mm.
role to be put in. And there's a lot of work being done about like the household labor piece and just bringing this to the surface, because so much of this is unpaid labor off the backs of moms and women. So I would, short answer is, Cindy, that it's unrealistic, and there is no such thing as keeping all of these things in some static balance state. It's just frankly impossible to do.
Exactly. No, I agree with you. And I'm thinking now, to the mom who's listening to this and feeling like, okay, I feel seen now, but what are my next steps? You know, we talked a lot about what's outside the home, and you mentioned a few times roles and within the home. How can we navigate that if within our own home there is this struggle of how to divide the work and how to divide especially the parenting aspect if the partner isn't stepping up? And there are I also want to talk about the other side where there are partners who are stepping, you know, in and helping a lot, and we're seeing a big change in that. So I don't want to isolate those because I know that there are, but I do get so many emails from moms who are overwhelmed and are the only ones taking their sick days, you know, to go take care of their
Yeah.
kids. They are
Yeah.
the only ones who are, you know, doing taking care of bath time or bedtime while the partner is home. So I know that that exists as well. How would
Mm-hmm.
you kind of support that mom that's listening to this in having that conversation that will be an uncomfortable maybe conversation with her partner, but it's definitely needed.
Mm-hmm. I feel like this is a bit of a double-edged sword or sort of
Hmm.
two-sided conversation because on
Yeah.
one hand you've got let's say the willing partner who wants to contribute, and we're going to get the fair play method and the cards, and we're going to
Yeah.
distribute the things in the home, and we're going to talk about ownership of tasks and responsibility. But then we still end up defaulting back into patterns.
Mm.
Why? Why does that happen? If everything to do with house and care work is in our junk drawer, like telling us that that's what it means to be a good mom, it's woven into our identity and our worth.
Mm.
So if it's not being done a certain way or the way we would do it, or we feel like we should do it, so the guilt kicks in when
Mm.
my partner takes the day off to go get my kid
Yes.
who's crying and fell on the playground and it should have
Yeah.
been mommy there to soothe them.
Mm.
So there is a piece of this that we sort of unknowingly own because everything in society tells us we need to be the one. That's what makes us a good mom. So letting go of that, if that's your measuring stick, is really difficult to do unless you're consciously doing the work, which is sort of what the book takes you through, how to do that work. So there's that piece where we fall into this pattern where we default back to old ways. If we don't unlearn the things that
Mm.
got us here, we can make lists all day long and it's not going to change our behavior.
Yeah.
So that's a big piece of it.
Mm.
It's a really common piece because a lot of partners are willing. And then when you have partners who are not willing, or you are not partnered, or you're either a single parent or a solo parent by
Right.
choice,
Mm.
there is a reevaluating of what is in that drawer still that you want to carry. Like, we can release and lessen the load
Mm.
in intentional ways when we evaluate whether all the things that we are carrying were consciously put there or not.
Mm.
So, for example, looking at the schedule and the activities and maybe reevaluating why we feel the need to do that and what's driving some of those decisions. Or, like, am I sinking so much money into this birthday party and so much stress and time and planning to make it Pinterest worthy because I really feel I need to do that? Or my 1-year-old who isn't even going to eat the cake really needs that? Or
Yeah.
is that because I feel the need to do that because of all these external pressures and
Mm.
messages? So there's a way to be kind to ourselves and practice like true self-care and self-compassion by doing us a favor and evaluating whether we even care about this stuff. Like, truthfully, us, once we scrape away all the things that tell us that we should care. And we
Mm.
can do a fair bit of lessening the load just by reevaluating those things that we're carrying.
I'm so happy you brought up the first birthday. This was, I remember after my first child, this was a huge conversation because I actually, for those who are listening who know me, they know I'm an extremely like simplistic person. And my daughter's first birthday was in the park. Like, we had a picnic with family members. I made the cake. There were no decorations because we had like a tablecloth from the dollar store that was just like pink, and that was it. And I am the only one out of my friend group that had zero pressure, and it felt great. And I do think that meets my own values, right? I didn't feel the
Yeah.
pressure to do it. And my kids now are 4, 6, and 8, and they get choices of like, let's go to the store together and see what's out there and or what's on sale, and then we'll pick the Mario plate if it fits the budget, right? Like, whatever it is, it's not a
Mm-hmm.
big theme. And I'm so happy you brought that, because I, I know so many of my friends have pressure because their friends are coming and their family members are coming, and it has to look good. And for us, maybe it's because I married somebody Italian, it's really about the food. It's just
Mm-hmm.
about having a good time with family and having good food and just like making it simple. So I know that's a huge pressure on a lot of people,
Mm.
but it doesn't have to
Yeah.
be.
And it might be that you are just in love and the maker type, right? Like it
Sure, of
might be
course.
that, like
Yeah.
I tell a lot of stories in the book about my maid of honor and friend in my wedding, like lives for making pies and baking and like loves it. And
Right.
if once you evaluate why you're doing that, it's truly
Mm-hmm.
coming internally, go for it.
Right.
But
Exactly.
if it is to, try to avoid judgment, and if it is to try and prove to others or ourselves that we're being a good mom, then we're doing it for the wrong reasons. And I talk in the book about how intensive mothering tells us that everything needs to be big and expensive and all
Mm-hmm.
consuming, that like high spend and high time investment equals memorability and connection and
Mm-hmm.
like all the things we think we're going to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But really, when I sit back and I think about my favorite birthday party, probably the only one I remember growing up, my mom had like 8 of my friends over and she let us pick dresses from her closet. We put on heels and she turned the hallway into a runway. It had a curtain and we came out from
That's
behind the
amazing.
curtain, strutted down the hallway, and then were awarded like a rolled up certificate piece of paper for like how great we did modeling the clothes. This was the
Oh,
birthday party.
I
And it's
love
the
it.
one that I
Mm,
remember. And it probably costs very little. And
mm,
it didn't need bells and whistles. Like I can't even
mm-hmm,
remember if there were balloons or not. Like none of that mattered.
mm,
It was just really about her understanding me and my friends and what we would
mm,
enjoy. It was novelty, it was memory making, it was fun. And none of those things have to be so smothering and draining on us.
mm-hmm,
I didn't have,
mm-hmm.
like, she didn't have to go and do a whole balloon arch and then learn how to hand make the cake and then figure out all the decorations that we're going to coordinate and then the outfit
Right.
for the kid to match. Like, none of that.
Mm,
We just wore her clothes and her
mm.
shoes and had a pageant. And it was a great time. And I
I
think
love
that
that.
that can be really freeing when we can
Mm-hmm,
take that concept away, that it doesn't have to be a production always.
mm. I'm thinking back to the beginning of our conversation where we just brushed a little bit on like what the rage is, or mom rage in particular. I like saying rage because when I talk about mom rage, I hear from dad saying, "Well, I think I experienced this too." So I know my audience are both moms and dads, so I just want to be respectful towards that. But the rage that many moms experience, I
Yeah.
feel that part of that is us not being connected or attuned with ourselves and kind of powering through these days, like with that load that we have on our shoulders. And then it just happens. Like moms explain it, from going from 0 to 100. And I'll approach that from an emotional awareness piece, saying, well, there was an in between. It might have been fast, or it might have been that
Right.
something happened during the day or the morning, or it's the accumulation. But that's my perspective as, a neuroscientist, because I feel that we are not aware of these micro emotions that we experience because we're always busy doing so much. How would you explain it from your end as a clinician? This rage, where is it coming from, and how can a mom who's listening feel that she can maybe gain a little bit of control over that, or what can she start doing to work on that?
Hmm. Yeah, I spend a lot of time in this topic and really trying to parse it apart. And the more
Mm,
that I learn and the more conversations I have and the more I spend in this space, I'm starting to put anger in two big buckets, like big conceptual buckets. When we're talking parental rage or
mm,
anger, we are talking maybe new parents who are sleep deprived, who are going through hormonal
mm,
fluctuations, who
mm,
are trying to adjust to their new role, lacking support, maybe predisposed for some anxiety and depression based on their mental health or their history. and maybe even experiencing depression or anxiety themselves, because we know that anger is a common overlooked symptom for anxiety and depression. So there is this individual biopsychosocial, like a biological experience of anger that is impacted by our mental health and our sleep and our physical body and all of that, which I believe is the anger that you're talking about, that regulation piece.
Right. Yeah.
But then there is this other bucket, and it comes back to what we were talking about off the top, where we expect mothers to do everything and we give them not even like acknowledgement in return. There is this maternal anger or rage or frustration at carrying the entire like load, mental, cognitive load of the home, and feeling like it's not even seen or appreciated, and feeling invisible because like this isn't even classified as real work to people, you know? And so when I talk about mom rage, I talk about it intentionally for a couple of reasons, because the expectations of mothers and their role is vastly different from fathers.
Yes.
And the expectation for how they manage their anger is also wildly different.
True.
So
Yeah.
our window of anger expression that we are allowed to have in motherhood is very narrow. We're meant to be kind and soft and nurturing and soothing and patient and all of these things. So when we are angry or having negative thoughts about our kids or losing our cool, it goes against everything we've been told mothers should be. And so we're not even allowed to feel a human emotion or like express that we're feeling it. We got to kind of smile and grit our teeth and figure our way through it. Of course, we're going to explode. Like if we can't, you know, if we're not allowed to feel it and deal with it, and that doesn't mean lash out always, obviously, but if we're not allowed to like allow it to be at the surface and talk about it, and we don't learn the skills to manage it, and we push it underground, and then we do explode. Whereas fathers, if they display anger, or like I was having a conversation with Dr. Reem Osharina of Psyched Mummy, and she was like, yeah, my son's coach will get on him and be like, oh, you guys didn't complete this correctly, so you need to go and do this and laps and push-ups and all this stuff, in like this really angry, frustrated tone, kind of reprimanding the kids. Acceptable for a man to do, seen as, oh, he just wants them to be excellent, and he's just wants them to excel, and he's just a disciplinarian, or he's just whatever. But if a mother was that coach, it would be entirely different.
Yeah.
So
True.
one, like I'm having this like existential questioning of anger in motherhood right now, being like, is it even that mothers are actually more angry than we ever have been, or than other parents are? Or is it just that we're policed to be like such a small window of anger that anything feels jarring to people,
Right.
you know? And then of course, when we feel that we have to constantly stifle our anger, it leads to dysregulation. We don't have the skills then in the moment, or we can't become curious or accept or validate those emotions in the moment, because we're so badly trying to outrun them or avoid them.
What can a mom do if she recognizes this in herself and just feels a lot of that shame and guilt that she's yelling at her kids a lot, and maybe even her partner, because she just feels that immediate rage in these moments? Is there some quick, I know that it's not a quick fix, but is there something that she can do in that moment? Is there some sort of reflection or thought or a pause perhaps that she can do?
Yeah, it reminds me of a bit of an analogy that I was reading about. When you have a fire in the house, you know, and you realize that there is a fire burning, you don't ignore the fire. You don't try and push it away. You don't try to ignore it. It is common sense to us that that will set the whole thing ablaze, right?
It's true.
So if we are feeling a fire brewing, we better figure out how we're going to take some deep mindful breaths, or you know, step away from the situation for a moment. Maybe, usually in my case, feed myself a snack.
Right.
That's like 90% of the time my issue, or have a good sleep and revisit it tomorrow. But what we're not going to do is just allow that fire to build and build and build until the
Mm-hmm.
whole place is burning down. Like that fire is much more difficult to put out than if we've paid attention to it
Mm-hmm.
initially. And that part takes some practice, as you've mentioned, and
True.
I'm sure you teach a lot about, is we're not
Mm-hmm.
so good at recognizing when the fire is like a
Mm-hmm.
little flame.
Right.
And so that's a really great place to start and just notice how you're feeling. Notice that trigger or that small fire. It's a lot easier to extinguish.
And many of those, I guess, little fires that I think of come back to us not addressing our needs, right? Like everything you just said now, feeding ourselves, taking a nap if we have to, trying to get some rest that night, going to bed early. They're needs that we have that we are so quick to put aside because, well, I can't go to bed now. I'm going to fold that laundry. Or,
Right.
I'm not going to eat now because if I clean or if I do something or get ahead of, in my work, maybe it'll be better, and we forget about that. And I have to say that's something I struggled with a lot and still do, because everything always seems to matter more than what I have to do for myself, and it's so
Mm,
hard. You're right, it's not something that's going to happen overnight, because we're going to have to keep reminding ourselves that we matter enough to go for a walk, like take that half hour and just go for a walk. It took me years to realize that I had to go for that walk. So I
mm-hmm.
just want to make sure that I say that, because I know if there's a mom, especially a new mom who's listening, you might be hearing people tell you, go for that walk, just go, you're home. But I was home with three kids, and one after the next, every time I had three kids in under 4 years. And for me, it was just a matter of, it's not the right time. Somebody needs me. And I
Yeah.
forgot that I needed me too. And I wasn't in the right chapter of my life to understand that. I only kind of started putting the work into that after my third was about 3 years old. And that's when
Mm,
things changed for me. And I had so much guilt for all those years because I kept saying, like, why can't I just do it? But then after having my third, I realized it wasn't the right time. And now I'm in the right mind space to do it. So I want to put that out there in case somebody
mm-hmm.
can relate to that, because you're not alone.
Mm-hmm. And it's very counter culture and counter intensive mothering to even validate our own needs and
Mm-hmm.
wants beyond caregiving and even
Yeah.
in caregiving, taking care of ourselves, right? Because self martyrdom is such the norm to be self
Yes.
sacrificing, and it is reinforced to be a good mom. We're constantly putting others' needs before our own.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the quickest way to burnout that we could,
Yeah.
like the fastest track we can
Yeah.
ever be on, right?
Right.
And
Mm.
it takes a mind shift for us to see that we are of the same value and worth as everybody in the house and our needs. And I think we talked about this briefly on my podcast. It's like
Mm.
they don't need to be first. They don't need to be
Mm.
above everybody else's. We're not talking about being superior or like meeting our needs first and then our children. Like that's probably unrealistic for most of us.
Mm.
But can they at least be a seat around the table on
Right.
equal
Yeah.
playing field?
Mm.
So my kid eats and I'm gonna also eat. Can we like in tandem try and meet these needs, or like keep, like if my child benefits from socializing and from play
Mm.
dates, uh, is that also a need of mine, and can that be on
Right.
equal playing field and priority as everybody else in the home? And just
Mm.
practice being equal.
Mm-hmm.
That is in
At
itself
least.
a step. Exactly. Like
Yes.
it feels like such a pendulum swing to go from last to first. But if we
I
can
get
just
that.
be like, the step in between where we don't need to go so extreme, but we do
It's
need to
true.
factor ourselves in and take care of ourselves.
Given the work that you did and the work you did to put your book, to write your book, what do you think we need to see in terms of changes in our society to start prioritizing, a mother's mental health and her well-being?
The first thing that comes to mind is like media literacy. I don't know why
Mm.
that's the first thing, but because so much of why we are struggling is because of the internalized ideals and pressures.
Mm.
If we had some literacy around how to critically evaluate the messages we are seeing,
Mm.
we wouldn't adopt them as truth. And
Mm-hmm.
that is a freeing principle and
So good.
skill to learn,
Mm.
right? If
Mm.
I can see somebody on social media who has a curated home with their 6 children in matching outfits and a sourdough loaf of bread being cut in the reel or TikTok, and know that that's literally that person's job. They get paid to do that, and it's highly curated. Nothing about it is realistic.
Mm.
Then I can be compassionate with myself. But without that literacy to understand and to critically evaluate the messages we're taking in, it becomes our new standard and source of truth. It's the new bar that we now
Right.
have to achieve. And that's a dangerous game to play with ourselves.
I do think of those posts where it's like, "Hi, I'm a mom of 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever it is, and here are my perfect little dinosaur sandwiches that I've made for all 6 kids' lunches." If that's your thing, it's okay, but we need to let those go because you're right. It just sets a standard that sets us up. It's not that it sets us up for failure, but we have that in our minds, thinking that that's what we have to get to, and it's not. It's okay. Whatever you send your kid with, it's okay.
Like,
We
that's
don't have to put
realistically
that
what other
pressure.
people are doing. It
Right?
sure
Yeah.
is not. It sure
It's
is
not.
not the reality for
Exactly.
99% of other people
Exactly.
sending lunches to school. My lunches are shameful, but I honestly, it comes home
You
anyways.
just need
So
to
let's
eat,
not,
right?
it's a whole other conversation. But
Exactly.
yeah, it's
So
just,
good. Mm,
it feels aspirational, but it's really self-torture. It's
right.
really self-torture. Yeah.
What do you, to end our conversation, what would you say are some of the 2 to 3 really take home tips that a mom could listen to and say, okay, as of tomorrow, these are the things I'm going to work on this invisible load that I have and to start that work. I'm assuming values is one of them because we spoke a lot about values, right?
Hmm. Values are your anchor or your
Mm,
GPS or your guidepost. Like, doing
mm,
that work to understand what's really important to you is something tangible, and it's fairly quick. You just dedicate a
mhm,
little bit of time to think it through, and then that becomes something you carry with you. So it's not super involved or a long process. So that's a really great practical place to start. The invisible load and mental labor really has power over us when it remains invisible. And so I talk in the book about my aha moment where
mm.
all of a sudden I just could look around and see all the invisible labor that went with every task. It was just like it clicked and I just got it. We all need to have that moment. We all need to be
Mm,
able to make that invisible labor visible because we can't share it or redistribute it
mm,
or let go of it otherwise. And that could just be as simple as writing down all the pre tasks that have to go into making the lunch, as we were talking about.
mhm,
Putting those things down, start to make those pieces visible. And how are we going to divide out all those pieces rather than just the making the lunch task?
mhm.
So, visibility it takes a lot of the power away when we can identify what we're really dealing with, clearly identify the problem.
So those lists matter. We do have to
Yeah.
write it down. Not a list, but I think you're
Not
right.
in the I'm managing my partner and I have to write them a
Oh
list
no,
because they can't do their own thinking, because that comes up in my community a lot. Let's just
right.
be clear. We are not responsible to be making and handing the list over.
Got it.
That's not the type of list we're talking about. But like, clearly having a bird's eye view of what
Right.
this work really involves.
I
Yeah.
agree with you. And I think it just also, I don't know if this links to what you're just saying, but for me, just to delegate, not between me and my partner, but realizing that my 3 kids that are home, I don't need to find ways to not be with them to get certain things done within the home. They're getting older now. And the more I include them and I let them know what my workload is, I've become a lot more verbal about it. And I notice that they get excited. They're like, "Ooh, it's Friday. It's laundry day. What can we do?" Versus, guys, I have a really heavy day today. I need you to stay busy as long as you can because we're 5 people in the house and I need to get things done. I've noticed the more that I let them know about it, the easier it gets on me. So I think, when your kids are getting older, it really helps to, again, it's not about delegating tasks, but putting it out there and just talking about what your workload looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that it's almost putting boundaries and structure to it. Or maybe we front load our time with them, and we've been playing dominoes, chicken foot, random
Mm-hmm.
game I played growing up. We've been playing that. And if I front load that on our day and we get that quality time in,
Yes.
then I
Yeah.
know that I have a little bit more freedom also to do the things that I need to do or include them
Yeah.
in them, because I'm not the default assumed person to fulfill
Mm-hmm.
these roles in our home. That's something that
Exactly.
we're challenging. So getting them involved, and not everyone doesn't automatically look to mom for a care or household task, but
Mm-hmm.
they they understand that they've got a piece in that division of responsibility that they too can own.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Erica, for joining me today. Congratulations on the release of your book, Releasing the Motherload. I am so happy and can't wait for everybody to have a read and to get their copy. And where else can people follow you and find you, your website or Instagram?
Yeah, I am Momwell on Instagram, momwell.com for therapy services, educational resources, workshops, courses, all the things. And you can find the book through there also, but the book is Releasing the Motherload, ericadjossa.com, or anywhere books are sold, Amazon, anywhere. You can find it anywhere. So thank you
Thank
so
you.
much
I
for
hope we
having
chat
me. This
again.
was amazing.
It was
Thank
a good,
you.
I loved it. Thank you for this conversation.